At the age of 15, I moved to Southwest Houston. I had moved around for many years, primarily due to being in foster care and not really having a strong support system or family. Houston itself is somewhat nice, but naturally, I had to be placed in a home in probably one of the most ghetto parts of the city. I was one of the only Caucasian people in the area, which made it somewhat difficult to make friends due to cultural differences and so on. I met a guy named David who had a girlfriend at the time. We soon became very close, and he became very flirtatious and somewhat protective over me. I also noticed he was deeply involved with drugs and had some major anger issues. I didn't realize how truly mentally unstable he was until after hanging around him and his girlfriend for a few months. One day, we skipped school and went to the nearest skate park. Naturally, as young burnouts, we just lounged around, smoked weed, spray painted, and kept busting our asses on the ramps at the park. After about 30 minutes, we were approached by several guys wearing all black clothing. I recognized a couple of them from my biology class. Next thing I knew, they began to attack David. He was thrown under the ground, being kicked and punched repeatedly. I did my best to try and pry them off, but that only ended in me receiving several blows to the stomach and several other areas of my body until I could barely get up. After that, we both ended up in the ER. David told me not to breathe a word to anyone about what happened, which only created more problems for me. But I listened because, for some odd reason, I trusted him. A week later, David found me in the hallway early in the morning before first period. He pulled me to the side and looked around anxiously. His eyes were darting back and forth between different parts of the hallway. "What's going on?" I asked, completely thrown off by his sudden, erratic behavior. "Those guys are going to pay for what they did to us," he whispered softly. "What do you mean?" I said nervously. "I have a gun. Miranda has one too. I'm going to take care of those fuckers today. Go home," he said through gritted teeth, reaching into his backpack and slowly revealing a black handgun. I quickly placed my hand on his, pushing his hand further down into the backpack. "David, don't let anyone see that," I whispered quickly. My heart was pounding, my head was spinning, and I felt a deep pit in my stomach. My mind raced 90 miles an hour. What the fuck was wrong with him? Why did his girlfriend, Miranda, have a gun? And what do I do now? "I don't want you to get hurt. I need to protect you, both of you. I trust you, and I know you won't tell anyone. Now go home," he said quietly, his eyes softening. My thoughts continued to race, and I did the only thing that I thought I could, try to get away from him and tell someone immediately. I said, "All right, whatever you're going to do, just wait. Let me get my foster sisters out first too, okay?" He nodded, and surprisingly, he let me go. I raced down 2 flights of stairs across the school courtyard and finally made it to the principal's office. I opened the door without even knocking, which pissed off the principal, but I cut him off before he could say anything, and I said, "David F. and Miranda H. both have handguns. They both brought guns into the school." A few minutes later, the school was put into lockdown, and my only 2 friends that I had that entire school year were arrested. There were news reports, officers questioned me, and as you can imagine, I was grounded for quite a while for my choice of friends. I later decided to move away from that area because I wasn't sure what would happen to me if they somehow got out while I was still there. I don't know if they really planned to use the guns on campus. I just know I was scared. For me, for the other students, for the faculty. All I know is that I might have saved someone's life that day, and I don't regret it. Although it doesn't seem like it, this happened quite a while back, probably over 10 years ago. I was in the later years of high school, and I was home alone. My parents were at a wedding that required them to stay at a hotel, and my brother worked the night shift. At that time, my family lived in a very well-known East Coast city in a blue-collar neighborhood that was starting to take a nosedive. As a teenager, I was a bit of a loner. I wasn't a nerd or anything. I was a big dude who had friends and went on dates, but I'm a natural introvert, so I cherished the rare alone time that I got. This weekend, I was looking forward to engaging in my normal empty house routine. Play some PlayStation on the big screen, order a late takeout dinner, usually pizza or Chinese, and pig out while watching some Dragon Ball Z. Then around 2 a.m., fall asleep on the couch with my old dog, Cecil. Cecil was a beagle who was as old as the hills and had been in our family for about 8 years. He was quiet and peaceful and spent his time begging for food and sleeping. Unlike most beagles, Cecil never howled or barked. He was more content to rest his head on your lap and spend the night there. Anyway, back to the story. It's approximately 1 a.m. I had just finished the last slice of pizza and was dozing off on the couch when I hear a bang coming from the back alleyway. I didn't think much of it. Anyone who's lived in a city knows noises happen at all moments of the night. Cecil's head popped up off my lap and the hair on his neck stood up. He was always a bit skittish, so I calmed him down and started dozing off again. Not more than 2 minutes later, I hear another bang, and Cecil did something I've never seen him do before. He leapt off the couch and ran like the wind towards the door leading to the basement, barking and growling like a dog twice his size. The look on his face reminded me of a German Shepherd canine unit. I'd never seen him like that before, which got my adrenaline pumping. Through the dog's barking, I can now make out a persistent banging. There was a seldom used door in the basement that led to our back alleyway. It was old and rusted and was hard to open even with a key, and it made a lot of noise. I suddenly realized that someone was trying to break into my house through my basement door. Quick little bit of context for anyone who hasn't lived in a bad neighborhood. If someone tries to get into your house and then moves on after they realize the door is locked, they want your stuff. If someone is persistently trying to get into your house despite the door being locked, well, they want you. Knowing this, I rush upstairs to grab the heavy wood baseball bat that I keep under my bed for situations like this. Then I head down to my basement. I probably should have ran, but I was a macho teenager with a tough guy complex, and plus, I had nowhere to go. While I'm heading down the stairs to my basement, Cecil blows past me with the speed and aggression of a dog half his age. Suddenly, I hear a man's voice say, "Oh, fuck," and then the banging stopped. I didn't call the cops or anyone else, which was probably the dumbest thing I've ever done. I just sat up for the rest of the night with a bat in my hand. My brother came home that morning, and I told him what had happened. We went to the basement door to take a look, and when we gave it a tug to open it, the whole door fell off. This psycho was one good shove away from getting into my house, but old Cecil scared him off. I'm pretty sure that lazy, fat old dog saved my life. When I tell this story to people, they dismiss his actions as a dog doing what a dog was supposed to do, but when I tell you that Cecil never barked or moved that fast in his life, you can take that to the bank. It was almost like he knew the urgency, like he knew the door was going to give. A few years back, we had to have him put down because he just had no will to live anymore. And before the injection, I got a moment alone with him. I thanked him one last time for his friendship and for what he did that night. At this point, I was a grown man with a wife and kids, and I'm convinced that none of that would have happened without Cecil. Thanks, pal. I miss you. I have an interesting dark web story from a perspective that most people don't get. Namely, from the perspective of someone that used to actually work for an associate of a site that was kind of like Silk Road. Nowadays, I do work for a company that contracts out cybersecurity stuff, mostly penetration testing, threat hunting. It's fun. I like working on the safe side of things, doing work for the man, and getting paid to break things for them. And I will never go back to the dark side of things, especially after what happened. I'm not trying to hype this up. What happened was absolutely horrifying, but it's the truth, and it's what happens when mistakes are made when working with criminals. So like I said, I used to work with a couple of guys that did dark web style business, mostly selling illegal stuff like drugs and, well, mostly drugs. In fact, it's best just to say that we sold a lot of substances to people that couldn't or wouldn't get a prescription for a premium. We had a lot of customers and most of them were repeats, and we had a very well encrypted list of everyone that we had worked with in the past, including their regular orders, and we had a very well constructed method of shipping. We would ship the items in boxes that looked like they were from other companies, and we would hide the good stuff with the other stuff in ways that made it unlikely that they'd be found. This was also a while back, before Silk Road was actually busted, so people weren't really looking for substances like that in the mail. My part of this operation was actually system security. I was in charge of keeping the site running and making sure no one ever got the information that we held, including who was in on the operation and our list of customers. I was good at my job. We never got hit by a honeypot operative, and I was good at sniffing out cops that were trying to do purchases, and we never had any security or downtime issues. I also kept the overall site looking clean, which may not be something that really means anything, but to me, we had the nicest looking dark web market that ever existed. I was actually proud of the work that I'd done on it. Now that you know me, the operation, and the site, and all that stuff, let's talk about the part of it that became problematic. A man that we'll simply call Rob. Rob was the ringleader of the whole thing, and we knew that he was in charge. Hell, most of us just accepted that it was really his business as long as we got paid, and we didn't really care what went on. Rob was the business major that had decided doing illegal stuff was the best way to pay back the money that he owed on his student loans, and he was a bit cocky when it came to doing the work that he did. He was actually arrested at one point on unrelated charges, and we all thought that we were going to be next, seeing as how he liked to talk. Thankfully, nothing happened and he was let go. He said it was because he had a good lawyer, but I don't know. Anyway, let's talk about the situation that actually happened. As I said, we all ran a little business on the dark web selling substances. Things went smoothly. Everyone was happy. That is, until they didn't, and then nobody was happy. Despite all the minor hiccups that did happen, it wasn't a huge deal until we had one specific customer that was very displeased with our service. We're going to call him Chris. Chris had a drug addiction, and Chris was probably our most frequent customer. Also, Chris was a very aggressive person when it came to communications. I know what you're thinking. Why are you in frequent communications with a customer if you are selling illegal items on the dark web? Well, unfortunately, it was Chris that was in communications with us. There was just always something wrong with this order. I wasn't involved in getting the content, the shipping, or the actual business side, so I kind of just ignored the situation. I ran the back-end servers, which included our messaging system, so I got to see all the communication that went on. Unfortunately, Rob, being the hard-headed jerk that he was, liked to antagonize Chris when he was being irrational. He would message him saying that he was an idiot, not to purchase from us ever again, things like that. The last time this all went down, Chris messaged back saying that if we didn't get his order right, he was going to go to the cops. Now, there are a handful of things that you don't do when you're dealing with people on the dark web, and one of them is to threaten to contact the police and shut down the operation. When this message came through, Rob sent out a correspondence to all of us that this customer was to be blacklisted and that he would be contacting people within other markets to make sure he was never sold to again. The problem is, Rob sent this to Chris as well. My guess was that it was to send a message. You mess with us, I cut you off. Something like that. Well, while there are things that you don't do to those that operate dark web businesses, there's also things that you don't do to irate drug addicts that know how to use the dark web. This situation went from unsavory to an absolute hellstorm. At the time of all this happening, I was actually staying with Rob for a few days due to some personal issues at home. He had turned the back half of his basement into a bit of a spare room and server closet, so I was lucky enough to sleep where I work. Anyway, I was actually downstairs working on something irrelevant to the situation when I heard what sounded like someone kicking in a door. I immediately ran up to the top of the stairs, but stopped in the doorway to see what the hell was going on. There I see a 6-foot-something guy that had to be north of 300 pounds standing in the doorway with what looked like a shotgun in his hands, and Rob on his knees, literally begging this guy not to kill him. I heard Rob call him Chris, which told me all I needed to know. This wasn't going to end well, and I was likely going to be next. I stepped quickly down the stairs as quietly as I could, and I went down into the area beneath the steps, basically behind the server closet, and I dialed 911 on my phone. When they answered, I just told them the address and said I needed officers immediately because there was a man with a gun that had just broken in and hung up. I didn't want to give them any of my information since, I'm also kind of a criminal. No more than a few seconds after I hung up, I heard screaming, and then I heard a gunshot, and I knew what that meant. I waited there until I was certain that he had left, and then I did the most cowardly thing that I could. I climbed my way up and out of the basement window with my backpack, and I walked calmly to the McDonald's that was pretty much across the street so that I could see what played out. The cops showed up, and then the ambulance, and then the coroner and some crime scene guys. I listened to the police radio to see if they ever caught the guy. There was some crosstalk about the situation, but in the end, they jumped to encrypted channels and I lost track of what they were doing. My stay at Rob's house was a very temporary thing, and I had most of my stuff in my backpack, so I wasn't overly worried about them knowing I was there. I did go into cleanup mode with the servers though. They were nuked entirely, so no information was ever pulled. It was a pretty messed up situation, and I really did feel bad for what happened to Rob. But in the end, if you're going to work as a criminal, you have to face the consequences of being a criminal. Did he deserve to die? No, absolutely not. But that's not how Chris saw it. So, my final suggestion: avoid the dark web. Deep web stuff is fine, it's usually pretty safe, but do not go down that rabbit hole because sometimes what you find may be unpredictable.